What if the biggest thing that's holding you back from making an impact isn't out there, but it's in here? You know, it's interesting, as business leaders, we spend a lot of time thinking about our business, what we're doing, our team, the people we work with, our customers, the market, what's happening in the news, what's going on in my feed. And all of those things are important. But what I want to speak about today is a story less told and less well understood. And it's thinking about our role as leaders through the lens of the stories we tell ourselves. And for the last 2-3 years, I've been working on a project called the Story Code. And it's a very simple but profoundly transformational approach to understanding these stories we tell ourselves and how to go on to make an impact in your own life and those of others. So join me on a bit of a journey now. But before we do, have you ever looked successful on the outside but felt like an imposter on the inside? I need to see some hands, please. This is a safe space. You're among friends. Okay, this is a pretty common experience. I'm going to say that was about 60-70% of the audience, which is wonderfully candid and vulnerable of you. Thank you. Because the statistics tell us that 70% of working professionals, so most of us in this room, will experience the sensation of what's better known as imposter phenomenon at least once in their career. Self-doubt, and we've touched on it a couple of times. But we all know, and I'm sure you know, people who have that sensation daily. In fact, we know that millions of people are living with some form of self-doubt as a leader every single day. And so I want to dive into a little bit about what's going on. We're going to go high, then we're going to get into some nitty-gritty things. But first, on the theme of vulnerability, and thank you for kicking us off, David, a bit about a story for me. Now, if I go back 5-6 years ago, 2019, I want to take you to a fateful Saturday and paint a bit of a picture of the Mark back then. 45 years old, married, 4 children, 2 dogs, big mortgage. I'd founded a company with my wife 10 years prior, and we had about 30 people. So I had a payroll, I had clients, had lots of stuff going on. It turns out working with people is difficult. I don't know if that's ever... Has anybody had that experience? I mean, I'm not the problem, right? Saturday was my day to get out in the garden. Like many of us, I like getting out there and just getting lost in the hum of the lawnmower, doing some gardening. And so Saturday was my escape day. But the problem was this particular Saturday, I woke up with a slight headache. You've had that experience, you woke up with a slight headache. I told myself, in true Aussie fashion, should be right, mate, have a coffee, maybe a Coke, an emergency can of Coke, get on with the day because I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. I found myself at Bunnings, my local Bunnings. Should have had the sausage, but I didn't. But I found myself there, and something profound happened to me as a healthy man who otherwise thought everything was fine, even though life was completely full. Grayscale started to descend. I started to feel a sense of, maybe I'm not okay. This faint headache that I had started to pound, and it's like every heartbeat was throbbing this sort of, like my head was going to explode. I found myself getting tight-chested, my hands getting really, really sweaty. And I got to confess, other parts of my body were about to let go. And I thought, and I instinctively grabbed the aisle, and I thought, honestly, like, is this a heart attack? Like, am I going to die? And a little thing about me, I'm the first child. We first children are always very responsible. Any first children? First kid, right? Right. Little hot tip. Don't get in a car when you're feeling like this. I made a poor decision. I don't actually remember getting home, but I knew that I had to get out of there now. And this wasn't in the plan. This wasn't my plan for Saturdays, because every Saturday I got to do these things. Well, I rushed home, burst through the door, screamed for my wife, collapsed on a bed, and she started looking after me, putting, ice packs and things. I passed out that day, 7 hours. I woke up, had some food, and then I slept again all night. And in fact, I was out of work for 2 weeks. And even then it took me a long time to get back into work. This was a profound wake-up call that I did not see coming. One of the things that happens when you go through an experience like this is you start getting all of the treatment that you can get your hands on. Or at least that's what I did, decided to lean into this new problem that I didn't see coming. And I had this moment where I was thinking about all of these treatments, and I suddenly realized that maybe my problem isn't so much about all of these pressures, but maybe it's actually the story I'm telling myself. What if the problem isn't so much trying to deal with all this sustained stress, but actually how I'm thinking about it? And there's a great saying, a book out there I recommend, The Body Keeps Score. Turns out if you just keep, I don't know if it's blokes, but if you just keep going, is it blokes? I think it's all of us. If you just keep going and going and going, you tell yourself you're going to be okay, at some point the body says you're not okay and you're going to stop now. But in that process, I revealed something deeply profound that I want to share with you. And the story I'd been telling myself is this: you're not a real CEO. You see, I'd had a couple of experiences by way of comparison. They say comparison's the thief of joy. Somebody else is a better leader than me. Oh, that person's doing really well. I've seen, as a journalist, interviewed lots of CEOs. In fact, horror of horrors, I had a consultant working for me. I was paying her. She pulled me aside and she said, "Now, Mark, you're not a real CEO, right?" Now, if ever you're in that position, can I just say, don't say the quiet bit out loud. So I started to have this big awakening that I'd been living in a narrative. And in fact, this idea, this limiting belief was holding me back. It was actually all coming down to this sense of, who am I and do I have what it takes? Now, I'll give you another quick hot tip. If you ever get into a period of sustained stress, which I suspect many of you are, go for some comedy. Can lighten the mood. This one, I've actually tweaked a quote from a US comedian. Every great story has a beginning, middle, and a panic attack. Start looking for the lighter shades of grey in the middle of these problems. I'll tell you what else was encouraging. I went and saw my GP and he said to me, "Now, Mark, most blokes come and see me when they've hit the proverbial tree. You've come to me just before." I was like, well, that feels pretty good. But as I reflected on it, I realized there's got to be a lot of other people out there going through this. And so I started researching and I started looking into the problems. And it turns out I wasn't just alone. In fact, I was part of a much bigger global story. And in fact, it's a frighteningly big global story. I'm going to touch on this. If we can go from the macro, many of you will probably know the Stephen Covey circles of control. Are you familiar with this? If you haven't, just a very brief walk through it. What he says is that in the middle of our lives as leaders, as people, we have a few things that we can control. When you get up, what you wear, what you eat, the sort of, maybe you decided to go for a walk. All of these things are quick examples of what's in our control. When we moved around the outside, there's people that you can influence. There's your friends, your family, not your teenagers, by the way, can't influence them. But you get the idea, right? And the people that you talk to, your customers, there's a sense of influence. We don't often think about it a lot. And then we have out this outside area, the circle of concern. I think it's actually better described as the circle of no control. And this is what the experts and economists around the world are talking about the world we live in now, which is thought of as a polycrisis. Now, it's a big word, but all that means is multiple interconnecting series of crises, geopolitics, wars, economic problems, and on and on and on. And if you're following all these feeds, it starts to get a bit overwhelming, right? I'm seeing some nods, right? And so what happens, and I'm thinking about this as the great squeeze, this sense of what's in my control starts to become smaller and smaller and smaller. A bit like me in Bunnings. Suddenly your world feels tight, limited, and you've got no capacity. How am I going to lead these people? How am I going to be a great father, a great parent? I went on a big research journey. I used to be a journalist. I spent 10 years as a journalist, and I'm a learner. So I'm kind of irrepressible when I get an idea in my head. And I discovered that this year alone, globally, as corporates, we've spent $66 billion on corporate wellbeing programs. Now, that's actually increasing at 5% every year. And by 2035, it's going to be a $100 billion market. Now, that's impressive at one level, I think you might agree, because it means that the corporates, the organizations are looking after their people. But I'll tell you what else it says. The problem's not getting any better. We're throwing more money at a problem that's not going away. This year, 61% of Australian workers feel burnt out this year. And that's more than the global average of 48%. Australia, North America, the most burnt out countries in the world right now. And I think that's staggering. Don't you think that's staggering? I won't ask you to put your hand up, but I want you to reflect on this. Now, a few more, because it gets worse, don't worry. 1 in 2 Australians we know from Beyond Blue have experienced burnout in this past year. We have 30% of people living with ongoing mental health conditions at work right now. I'm sure some of you in this room. Psychological injuries, which is a new thing we need to start getting our heads around as leaders. There's actually legislation here that protects people from psychological injury. People who experience that tend to have about 34 weeks off, which is 4 times more than somebody who might have a physical injury. Now, that's bad for the person, quite obviously, but it's also bad for you if you're in business. And then this other one, this is from the Gallup survey this year. Just 21% of global workers are engaged. So we go on and on about productivity, but it's pretty hard to make people productive if they don't actually show up to work in a way that they're ready to thrive and contribute and do amazing things. So there's a quick sketch, and I told you it gets worse. It really does. Infinite workday. This is a term that's been coined by Microsoft. I find it fascinating. Now, how many of you use Microsoft's 365 platform, right? What they did was they looked at all the metadata, all this data about the data, and they studied how it works. So they took the people out of it, de-identified it, and what they found is quite remarkable. We get 270 notifications every day. We get 153 Teams messages a day. Can it please stop?
It's just it.
And we get 2 minutes between every digital interruption on any sort of device. Now, I honestly don't know how any of us get any work done. Not only that, they found that our days are getting pushed out to the edges, to the margins. We see these peak productivity periods around 11 o'clock, which also coincides with most of the messages you get because everybody's really busy. And then at 6 o'clock at night, we have this other peak, and then on into the night and also on Sunday. So the Sunday night scaries, who gets the Sunday night scaries? I've got to go back to work. What am I going to do? Well, it's all in the data. And I was reflecting on this and pulling together a few different bits of research to give us a perspective. This is what we want right now. We want teams of people who have a hopeful, high EQ leader. This is somebody who understands them, cares for them, gets a sense of who they are and where they're going. We want these really wonderful work experiences where all of my expectations about work and life are loaded onto this leader. We want a clear job design and we want a simplified organizational work practice, which is just another clever way of saying, can you just show me how I'm going to do this work? What we actually get, though, is quite different. We get disengaged managers. You just saw the 21% from the Gallup. We get blurred boundaries where we don't actually know in this infinite workday where life can actually, for me, exist and how much of it is work. We get owned by it, particularly as leaders, we can't escape. And this high workload, limited resources problem. And I did my own little survey in LinkedIn, and that was the number one. I got too much work. And of course, lack of autonomy. Now, are we feeling good? Yes. I had this moment, which is what if, though, the real problem isn't the workload, but actually self-talk and the stories we tell ourselves. And the aha for me as a journalist, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people around the world on podcasts, as a journalist, through my research, I had this aha moment, which is, what if the stories and the storytelling technique, the ways that I help people tell them externally, helping brands and companies communicate with others, what if I could use those techniques on my own health journey? And so I did. And I want to share with you just one simple concept that helped me and has really given me a lot of clarity. And I call it the vision reality gap. Now, we've heard incredible visions here today, and all of you have a vision. You have a picture of how things are going to go. Now, the reality is I'm not there yet. And we have different feelings about that. But ostensibly, the bigger the vision reality gap, the more opportunity there is for stress. And as a journalist, I was always going after that gap, because the drama, as we touched on earlier, is often where the story is. But the problem is, if you have, by the age of 45, expected to not have a mortgage and have well-behaved children, and dogs that do what they're told, and it's not happening, and you don't deal with this narrative, you haven't understood it and got clarity, suddenly you find yourself caught up in all of these stories, and it has a profoundly negative effect. I know it because I've lived it, and the research backs it up. Well, let's get into a little bit of productive where to from here. And I want to share with you the concept of self-care. Remember the circle of control? So the things that are within your control, when you go through any kind of health journey and you get in touch with a doctor or anybody else of a medical professional nature, here's the things they're going to tell you. You've got to look after what you're eating. You're eating too much rubbish, cut it out. Get some more protein in there, you know this story. Then you've got the next one. You need to sleep. You're not sleeping well. I have actually tackled my snoring journey, just for the record. My wife's not here, but yeah, that's been a transformational experience. And then they say to you, get some exercise. Okay, how many of you exercise today? This is not a shame. Don't put your hand up. It's fine. But you know what I'm saying? We've all got to get out there and exercise. And can I tell you how frustrating it is to spend all this money to be told that? I knew that. Right? But here's the thing. These foundational elements of self-care are literally the foundations upon which you build your life and your leadership. We have to get these things right. I also discovered that there's a missing pillar, which I've already alluded to, which is self-talk. And the reason why self-talk is a missing pillar of self-care is because it's with us every day and it is completely within your control. One of the things we don't understand about these stories in our head is that they are stories and we are the storyteller of our own life. And because they're stories, we can rewrite them. Now, you can bring in people to help you. Yes. You can get lots of input. Yes. But it's still within your control. And so there it is. Let me unpack for you, because I've done some research around what are the different components, and it starts to unlock things. And I'm sharing this with the hope that it's going to maybe start a bit of a conversation for you. The first thing that we experience is an inner critic. I think about the inner critic as an annoying colleague at work. This is a fictional example, but you get given a task and then this colleague comes over and says things like, well, you're not good enough for this job. You'll fail, or perhaps you're faking it. Fake it till you make it is actually part of our culture, right? And this is really the core of self-criticism that we allow these stories to foster in our heads over time, and we don't challenge them. Now, self-talk has a cousin, and that cousin is called limiting beliefs. There's plenty of literature. I've looked at more than 60 research papers on this, and the limiting beliefs for me is quite profound. This gets to the heart of our identity. They're what we believe about ourselves, and we've touched on it a few times already today, these sense of what can I do, what's possible for me. And the limiting beliefs are things like I'm not a real leader because I had a different picture, the vision reality gap. Maybe I can't change. I once, when I left my last job in journalism, the editor said to me, he was just sort of sending me off saying, I'm so proud, like you're making a big change. Well done, Mark. I can never change. I'm only going to be here. I haven't got what it takes to do anything other than this job. We say other things like, I'm not talented enough. This is the if-then idea. If I do this study, then I'll be able to. And so these things actually act as profound barriers to our personal behavior. They stop us from doing really amazing things. They stop us leaning into new opportunities. Now, when we start to then move forward, the experience that I've had led me to realize that we have an old story and we need to think about how do we flip the story to start writing a new one. And the key to this is that if you're anything like me, we're a bit forgetful. We tend to remember all the bad stuff. And I'll give you a quick example. I spent 3 years living and working in San Francisco as a journalist, the time of my life. But at the end of it, I also had all of these really, really difficult experiences. I came home saying how burnt out I was because it was the dot-com crash, and I'd, been through all of these traumas, and we left and came home. But my wife reminded, remember all these good things that we did, all these people that we met, all the experiences that you had? We're quite selective and negative in our mindsets. And so your old story needs to become your new story needs to put aside all of these negative stories and start remembering the good stuff. And by that, I mean your successes. And we start thinking about, where do I sit within this? Am I on a journey from rags to impact? Am I that hero on the hero's journey? Where do I see myself in a broader narrative in my life? Because guess what? We're all writing one every single day. I think about it like a smartphone, and it's on video record, and every now and then we take little snapshots, and there's moments in time that stick in our heads. And so the theory here is that when we grab onto and intentionally write down and record and remember these stories, they start becoming part of a new talk track. Now, the story code literally is a code, and I'll just briefly go through a few ideas here just to show you how it works, and I've worked with groups and leaders on this. The first stage is where we challenge these old narratives. We look at, well, what is my inner critic? What is my limiting beliefs? And what's my archetype? What sort of person am I? What's this narrative that I'm inhabiting? The second one is the overwrite stage, and we look even further into that narrative. We start saying, well, if I am the hero in the hero's journey, seen Frodo or any of these big stories, right? The hero always gets stuck at some point. The big dramatic moment where you think they're never going to make it out, right? They make it out. And so we need to start getting some clarity about, well, what happens in my type of story? And then the next stage is this deciding, and this is the really, really creative, interesting part of your rewriting story, where you say, I'm going to make a decision to become this type of person that I've dared to dream I could become. Cognitive and emotional parts of your life become intertwined, and you start to actually make some decisions about how am I going to do this. And then the encoding part is the fun bit too, of course, which is that this is a journey. You don't go on a big journey like mine or any journey that you're experiencing in a short period of time. I wish it wasn't the case. But 5 years later, I'm doing really well. I'm speaking from scars, not wounds. But in order to do that, I have made lots of little micro habits part of my daily routine: walking, eating well, sleeping well, self-talk, retraining my talk track, and developing this new narrative for who I am and what I'm doing and where I'm going. A quick Venn diagram, because if you can't solve any problem with a Venn diagram, it can't be solved. Just keep that in mind for your next strategy session. Well, how would this fit into a Venn? I'm serious. It's the best ever. So very briefly, though, this is really the heartbeat of the story code, which says, I used to have an inner critic, but now I have an inner coach. I used to have limiting beliefs, but now I have healthy beliefs. I used to see myself as the victim in some terrible, terrible story. Now I see myself on the recovery, which I do. And because of that, I'm starting to write a new story. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you, are we prepared to get a little vulnerable with one another? Is that okay? What is one old story that's not serving you any longer? Can you just maybe take a moment, just write it down If you feel like you would like to share it with somebody next to you, I'll just give you a moment. You don't have to, but just take this moment while you're in this space. What's a story when you think about impact, when you think about some of the big ideas that you have, when you think about purpose, when you think about giving and being generous, what's the one thing that's holding you back? Can you make a decision today to work on that? Just a couple of minutes. I really want to ask you if there's anyone who wants to share it. Does anybody want to be brave enough to share the one thing that's holding them back? I won't judge you if you don't. All right. This is a big deal. Yes, you do.
Much better lieutenant.
I'm a much better lieutenant than I am a captain. What do you think, Lisa?
No. I give him the break.
He's a great captain, see? Right? And so there's, in your life, as a quick example, there are, and I'm going to talk to Lisa, how many stories in his life do you know that illustrate how great he is as a captain?
Oh, being a spike and just talk about being the best tiger.
Right. There we go. See?
And
you get to hear from Lisa, by the way, just this afternoon. So here's a great example. We forget the bad stories. Anyone else? Please.
Sorry.
Okay, the old story was Josh would be much better at this than me. What do you reckon, Josh?
Absolutely.
No?
Absolutely.
She was born for this. What is, Josh, one story that illustrates why Alana was born for this? One story.
It's just her art. This is like she said earlier. Is part of her upbringing is generosity just flows through her. It's in her. It's her heart.
Yeah. So another great example where sometimes you can turn to somebody who knows you really well because you've forgotten your own great stories. They haven't. This story code is about re-encoding a new set of narratives that we can recall in that moment. The inner coach pops up to smack down the inner critic. And I do this all the time. In fact, I'm doing it with my 11-year-old. What are we grateful for today? Right? And so these are new habits that we need to start thinking about how can we develop. But it all begins with that key focus on choosing and making a decision. I want to start to wrap up with something that I believe is quite profound. Storytelling is the single most profound agent of change in the world, full stop. If you look back through history, these heroes of leadership, these people who've shaped countries, geographies, the outcomes of war, that have had incredible moments of profound social change, have all had a story. They've all understood themselves within the context of a narrative. They've all understood where they're going and what needs to be achieved. And their primary vehicle for making that change for the better has always been story. You've always been able to retell that story. If I asked you about any of the people illustrated here, you'd be able to say, oh, that person went from here to here. They had this idea that they needed to whatever it was. Here's the really exciting twist. That same power to influence and to inspire other people can be used on you. You have the power to retell your own story and to have the same profound impact on your own life, because the stories we tell shape our meaning, our sense of meaning, the context, and how we can move forward. You know, I spoke before that the stories we tell ourselves can either hold us back or draw us forward. And so that is my invitation to you today, because when we get better at leading ourselves, we can have a transformative and profound impact on our leadership of others and make an impact. Thank you. And just to wrap up, I'm very excited. My book is on pre-sale as of today. If you want to, I'm very proud, so forgive me, but it's been an exciting journey. If you want to scan the QR code, there's a link tree there and look for you can connect with me, or you could place an order for the pre-order form. And I think if you put in the story code in all capitals, you get a discount on postage. Untold. My team said something. But please do, if you'd like to do that, and I'd love to catch up with you as well. So thank you again for having me and being able to share my story.
Let's give Mark an awesome thank you.